start with the ever-changing world of politics. Speculation is rife that the MK party's former Secretary General could today announce that he's leaving the party to form his own political organization. Floyd Shivambu has issued a media briefing invitation, which does not seem to be sanctioned by the MKP. In fact, Shivambu's future seems to be hanging in the balance. He'd been hailed in the past as the brains behind the EFF's policy in its formative stages and for later helping to draft the MK party's constitution while building its structures. But during the organization's Youth Day commemorations in Durban earlier this week, party leader Jacob Zuma informed members there that they won't tolerate any ill discipline among high-ranking officials. Of course, that was seen as a veiled swipe at Floyd Shivambu himself. Let's make sense of these political developments in the lead-up to that much-anticipated briefing at midday. Bring in now SABC News politics editor Zandile Mbeje, who's with us in our studios. Great to see you indeed. Thanks very much for joining us. It is remarkable what has happened in the 10 months since Floyd Shivambu announced that he was leaving the EFF. Many people's jaws were on the floor back then, and I think many jaws are on the floor even now.
You know, whoever came up with, well, it's not a slogan in South Africa, but a saying that basically goes like, South Africa is alive with possibilities. Probably knew how this country pans out when it relates to...
Sorry, let me interrupt you there. Apologies. We seem to be having issues with your mic. Apparently, we can't really make out what you are saying. And I know there's a lot of poetry in there, which, of course, needs to be heard by our viewers. So let's get that sorted out, by the way, while I'll tell you a bit more about Floyd Shivambu and what we know about him. He, of course, started his political career in the ANC Youth League. At least that's when there was a whole lot more attention on him. And even then, it wasn't smooth sailing, as it were. Between 2008 and 2011, Shivambu served as the ANC Youth League spokesperson until his suspension in 2011. Fast forward to February of 2012, that's when he was slapped with a suspension letter from the ANC for 3 years. And that was for swearing at a journalist and for calling for regime change in Botswana. It was in about May of 2014 that he ultimately became an EFF MP. But before that, Shivambu, together with Julius Malema, as well as several others, co-founded the EFF. That was in July of 2013. And just over a year later, Shivambu was elected the EFF deputy president. And of course, it was on the 15th of August last year. That's when the bombshell was dropped. I still remember the day where there was a very cryptic invitation from the EFF saying that they were calling for a media briefing. And that's when we ultimately heard that Shivambu, of course, would be leaving the party to join the MKP. 10 months later, here we are, yet another cryptic message being sent out for a media briefing. And again, speculation is rife around what happens next. So, Mzai, you're still explaining that saying about how South Africa is really alive with possibilities.
Yes, no, I was saying, whoever came up with that saying to say South Africa is alive with possibilities probably knew something we didn't.
Right.
Because if you look at how we move as a country, not only political, but generally, so we are a special breed of people. So clearly in politics, it's even more interesting because it plays itself out very interestingly. So something you could never have thought of just appears to happen. I mean, how many people could even think of Floyd joining MK back then? So that was a surprise then, given the history and what had happened. So 10 months later, after the role that he has played in the MK, so we are in the MK party, so we are now talking about the possibility of him moving on. So that is quite interesting. But of course, as they say, a day is a very long time in politics.
Absolutely. And of course, all of this is very speculative until 12 o'clock when we finally get official word. But a lot has been said about him possibly moving out of the MK party. And so I wonder what you reckon is actually taking place behind closed doors here. I mean, Floyd Shivambu as an individual was thought to have been a very calculated politician. He'd never really makes a move without really considering what might happen a few steps after that. But here we are in a scenario where it seems he may have kind of misstepped here.
I think, you know, in my own looking at of the situation and the MK in general and the politics of our country, I think this is what could have happened, Ayanda. So we had former President Zuma announce in December 16, 2023 that he will be supporting a political party. So that's how MKP came to the fore as a political party that was going to be contesting elections. And then, of course, given his influence, his popularity, so he managed to then become number 3 in last year's elections. So as he was campaigning, you could see that he was going to cause huge damage to the establishment at the time. And then, I mean, we saw what happened. I mean, he brought the ANC under 40. I mean, even parties like EFF somehow struggled to grow because some of the base they had been using got eaten away by the MK. So what basically happened was that here is an individual, a persona of President Zuma, with his influence, being able to attract voters, mainly in KZN, Gauteng, Mpumalanga, and here and there across the country. So, with no solid foundation in terms of the structure as the party, because when all is said and done, so you can use your influence, your persona, but beyond that,
you need to run a party.
You need to run a party.
Right.
And that's where many people thought when Floyd came in, given his history and how he's been able to really be part of creating new things, he was going to be actually very resourceful. And I think it turned out to be the case because before then, so even, I mean, currently, MKZN is the leading party in terms of votes, but is not in government. 45, they're just 5% short. So all that was blamed on the fact that there was no proper structure in terms of who to communicate with. With Floyd coming in, so you started seeing those structures coming into place and then clearly seeing that now the party is starting to stand on its own. So, but because of how the party came about and some of the individuals who may have been there right from the beginning had a very vested interest. In fact, it doesn't matter how it ended, the issue of Duduzile Zuma and Floyd, when she went on Twitter to basically insult Floyd. That said so much about what we do not know. Because to label him as a mafikizolo and all sorts of things. So that did give you an indication that some people may feel somewhat otherwise. And then that does appear in the decision making. I mean, when the decision to remove Floyd was then made, I mean, you could have seen some of the membership of the MK itself basically saying, why would you do this to the best SG we've had, someone who has given the character and the direction to the party. So clearly, those conflicts where people who may have been central in the creation of the party, but with not so much in terms of putting in the systems and structures, and then here is someone who's just arrived, is able to put in the systems, and then those conflicts happen, and then there'll be all sorts of issues. And I think that's where this thing is. And I think what Floyd found was that he came there as a politician and perhaps was reminded that, you know what, you may be a politician, but we achieved this when you were not here.
Right.
So we're probably going to continue in our own way. Not knowing perhaps that, as much as the persona of President Zuma was the one that carried the MK, for it to sustain, you need a proper structure and system. And I think that's where this conflict started.
From what I'm hearing, the suggestion, I suppose, is that if Floyd Shivambu announces that he's leaving at midday today, this could actually still be seen as a bit of a blow to the MK party, given the kind of groundwork that he was laying behind the scenes.
It will be a huge blow. It will be a huge blow. I mean, before Floyd came to MK party, we did not have the constitution. There is a constitution now. He was part of those who drafted the constitution and perhaps even leading in that regard. A lot of systems are there. Not to say, I mean, he is faultless. I'm sure he's got his own issues. But in terms of what we see in public and how the party should perhaps run, so all those things are taken into account. So I think it would be a huge blow, given also who this person is in terms of being able to put the systems in place. So it would be quite interesting. And perhaps another addition to a whole list of political parties that we have.
Yes, that's where I was going to next. I had Professor Mgomezulu earlier on asking him about whether or not South Africa really needs another party, especially on the eve of the election. But I'll ask you a slightly different question. When Floyd Shivambu announced that he's joining the MKP, he essentially sent out a message that he was misled about the former president and in fact has somewhat seen the light. Personally, I can't wait to hear that justification today, if indeed he is leaving.
I think that's what many people would want to hear. What exactly has changed? In fact, Ayanda, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I sat down with him where he was still very praiseworthy of a former president to say the kind of advice and counsel he's been getting from former President Zuma has been really invaluable. So if, let's say, the decision is to leave today, who will he point fingers at? Will it be at President Zuma or will it be at Duduzile, who many believe actually could be perhaps the reason why Floyd never got along very well with the leadership of the MK?
Absolutely. All right. I suppose midday can't come any sooner. Zandile Beche, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. And as you can see, the build-up to that moment continues here. And it's not really just about Floyd Shivambu, the person, but also about the ever-moving political landscape of this country since last year's seminal national elections.